Welcome, everyone, to ICTforAg 2023. It is my great pleasure to kick off this year's conference. My thanks to CGIAR, DAI, and Dev Global for their leadership and partnership with USAID in hosting this important gathering. It is great to see how ICTforAg is growing and evolving in exciting ways since its inception in 2015. Over the next 3 days, more than 1,000 people from around the world are expected to convene virtually to exchange ideas and solutions about how digital technology can transform our agri-food systems. This is an absolutely essential conversation to be having. Our agri-food systems are facing unprecedented challenges, and vulnerable communities are struggling like never before. As you all are keenly aware, digital technologies are helping communities to withstand shocks and stresses and to strengthen resilience in new ways. We can see this in fragile areas where smallholder farmers are using improved forecasting systems and geospatial data to make better decisions about when to plant, harvest, and water their crops. We're seeing this as small and medium agribusinesses, the backbone of so many agri-food systems, tap into mobile services to access financing, store and move their products, and reach new customers. At USAID, we're working with partners around the world to make digital technologies an integral part of our work. Last year, the US government launched a new global food security strategy, which guides our whole-of-government Feed the Future Global Hunger Initiative. The new strategy elevates digital technologies as part of how we carry out and also measure our efforts. This allows us to ensure that the appropriate and responsible use of digital technologies, from infrastructure such as satellites to software like mobile apps and websites, are not just an optional benefit of our programs, but an integral part of our implementation. USAID's work in Nepal is just one example of how we're doing this. Our partners are working with local app developers to connect more than 160,000 farmers with best practices to manage pests and efficiently use fertilizer. Over the next few days, you'll hear more inspiring efforts and progress underway to transform our agri-food systems through digital technology. But of course, that's only part of the conversation. The world is rapidly moving to a digitally connected world, but millions of people remain disconnected. Cost, network coverage, digital literacy, and other factors are blocking so many from reaping the benefits. Women in particular often face greater barriers to accessing technology that might otherwise connect them to finance and new job opportunities. This carries real consequences for their families, communities, and local agri-food systems. If we are to truly leverage digital technologies, we need to overcome these hurdles. This year's ICTforAg is tackling exactly that with its theme of cultivating inclusion. I am thrilled that USAID can contribute to this important discussion with the release of our new Digital Agriculture State of the Sector report. We'll be launching the report during the second keynote today. One of the report's key findings tells us that a thriving and inclusive ecosystem for digital agriculture could add roughly $500 billion in value every year to the agriculture industry in low and middle income countries. Just imagine the impact that could have on helping to feed the world and building a far more resilient food system. But that won't happen without investing more in digital infrastructure and technologies and ensuring that they reach the most marginalized groups. Efforts like the ICTforAg Inspire Challenge 2023, which was launched by CGIAR as part of this year's conference, can incentivize the change we want to see by rewarding innovative companies that are expanding their services to more women. USAID is pleased to support one of these prizes, focusing on gender, climate change, and nutrition, that will be announced later this week. We're also working to support donors and implementing partners in considering all aspects of a person: gender, economic status, minority status, and more as they develop their digital interventions. We've developed an inclusive digital design toolkit for just this purpose, and we'll launch it today during the first breakout sessions. I wish you all an enriching and inspiring conference, and I encourage you to think about how we can together accelerate making digital technologies and agri-food systems more inclusive, locally led, climate responsive, and user-centric. Thanks to the new ICTforAg Learning Network, which is launching with this year's conference, this conversation can continue after this conference ends. In just a few moments, you'll hear from Professor Kentaro Toyama with the University of Michigan School of Information. His expertise and work in the digital development space is well recognized. As one of the co-founders of Microsoft Research India, he supported a research project on video-based extension that was spun off into Digital Green, which he helped to launch as a founding board member. USAID has partnered with Digital Green to help reach thousands of farmers in several countries around the world. Please join me in welcoming Professor Toyama. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd really like to say thanks to our hosts, USAID, CGIAR, DI, and Dev Global for inviting me to speak. It's a real honor and a pleasure. So today I want to be speaking about agricultural development in the age of AI, and I thought a lot about what to present. I think over the next couple of days, you're going to hear a lot about different ways in which AI might be applied in agricultural development. So instead of really focusing on that kind of project, I'm going to talk a little bit about different things I've learned over the years with respect to both AI and development. And these comments will be based on 30 years almost of experience that I've had working with AI, both as a research scientist, as an observer of the field, as well as nearly 20 years working in international development. I will definitely say I'm not an agricultural expert, but I've engaged with a lot of projects that involve agriculture and applications of digital technology toward it. So first, I'll begin by talking about my conclusions with respect to technology and how it actually has impact. The conclusion first. So for the most part, technology's impact is to amplify underlying human forces. And one way I'm going to present that is by asking all of you a question, and I'll just ask you to imagine what you think the answer is to this question. So which of the following groups most often completes massive open online courses? These are the courses that are available for free online. A, jobless high school dropouts, B, motivated working class people, or C, college educated professionals. Now, if you thought C, you'd be correct. It's now been a little over a decade since the first MOOCs came on the scene. Initially, they were thought to provide an education for everybody. In fact, in the early days, people used to say that with MOOCs, we would no longer need to have physical universities because people could just learn online. In fact, data about who completes MOOCs is now very well studied. And what the conclusions are is that MOOCs actually they're completed most often by people who already have jobs, who are often college educated, and who are in various stages of their professional career. Now, why would that be, given that the people who really need an education are probably these other categories of people? Basically, what it is that people with an education already know how to take in that information. They have good study habits. They often have the leisure time, as well as the energy to do extra work after their job. You can imagine if you're holding down 2 jobs just to feed your family, that the last thing you want to do is undertake more work, especially solving math problem sets or whatever it is, in order to really learn a subject. And so the overall conclusion about all of this research is that MOOCs are very good as supplemental education for people who are already good students. They're not great for exactly the people for whom we would like to improve education. And the larger conclusions I want to draw from this is that if the goal is supporting people with lower incomes, then building human capital through human instruction and mentorship really matters most. Ultimately, education is social. It's really about. Oh, sorry. And has that been happening from the beginning? Working? Sorry about that. Yeah, so basically the issues are that if the goal is to support people with lower incomes, we want to build human capital through human instruction and mentorship. Ultimately, education is social, and it's not about the knowledge transfer as much as inspiring people to do the hard mental calisthenics that learning requires. The other thing to realize about this situation is MOOCs are a technology which are basically free. And as long as you have some access to the internet, which increasingly people all over the world do, then you could be accessing them. But even with a free technology, it's really the rich who get richer, the educational rich who get richer. It's not necessarily everybody who benefits. So again, for the most part, technology only amplifies underlying human forces. We can see that this has a macro scale. This is a graph of the rate of poverty in the United States, the bottom green line. And despite a golden age of digital technology, what we've seen over the last several decades is that not much has changed with respect to the poverty rate, despite an incredible penetration of digital technology pretty much everywhere. And if you're concerned about inequality, this shows the same phenomenon, but not affecting inequality much. In fact, inequality has gotten worse over the decades. And this is showing lines in different regions of the world. Since we care about the global situation, the income share of the top 10% has only been growing, which means that, again, inequality is growing. Now, I want to be clear that I'm not saying that technology has no impact. I'm also not saying that technology can't be used for positive ends under the right conditions. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't use technology to achieve our goals. What amplification ultimately implies is that even in an age of incredible technology, nurturing positive human forces is always a good thing, because effectively whatever technology we already have will multiply and amplify those human forces. And I specifically believe that AI is not going to be an exception, despite the incredible power that will bring. So at this point, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about characterizing AI as it is today. One of the questions I get asked all the time is, what is it really that, especially this new generation of AI and generative AI, what can it do? And before I get into that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of AI. So very roughly, I've grouped two different parallel tracks of AI, neural networks and logic-based AI. And interestingly enough, in the 1940s and 50s, the early foundations for both of these tracks were laid. In the 60s and 80s, interestingly, there was some algorithmic development with respect to neural networks, but neural networks were not really where the attention was, either among AI scientists or in the public. In fact, most AI scientists tended to focus on logic-based AI. We thought that intelligence was about how you can get computers to think logically, deduce theorems, and so on. Over the 1990s and 2000s, this began to flip. So on the one hand, the logic-based AI did spectacularly well in doing things like defeating the grandmaster of chess at the time. But ultimately, the field kind of ran into a bit of a block. Like, we realized that logic by itself was not really enough to do some very basic tasks that even 5-year-old kids could do. And so over time, that work started incorporating more and more statistical methodologies, and they began to look a little bit more like neural networks. Meanwhile, with neural nets, there was steady progress, and in the 90s, there was significant advances in, for example, being able to recognize handwritten digits. And the Postal Service in the United States, at least, began to use neural network-based AI to recognize handwritten digits, which was a problem that until then had really foiled people in AI. And then fast forward to about the middle of the 2010s, and we saw what is now really the AI revolution. Thanks in great part to increasing computer power and the sheer availability of data, digital data, much of the core understanding of neural networks was shown to actually turn out to work spectacularly well if you did some tweaks in terms of a lot of the ways that neural networks are trained and run. And meanwhile, logic-based AI kind of fell by the wayside. At least at this point, very few people in AI are continuing to do this kind of work. although there are certainly elements of things that we learned over the last several decades that are still important. And there's a good chance that at this point, we're pretty sure that neural networks are the way to go. There's a big open question as to the degree to which we need to be manually inserting logic-based systems and combining them with neural nets. And I'm going to switch now and talk a little bit about what it is that today's generative AI is really good at. And I'm guessing that all of you who've been interested in developments with ChatGPT, with Midjourney and so on, have read lots of things about this. And I'm going to make an attempt at characterizing what I believe is generative AI's strengths. Effectively, neural network-based AI, and all of the headline-grabbing news about AI these days tends to be neural network-based. It excels at statistical pattern recognition and generation. And what's surprising is how far that gets us in terms of helping these systems appear to be doing some kind of reasoning. But underlying the neural nets, there's not actual logic-based circuitry, at least none that has been manually coded. And so what I believe is that what looks like reasoning is actually soft pattern matching and template completion, again, in a statistical sense, and based on huge amounts of data. So you can answer lots of questions very accurately. You can even do a lot of logic simply because there's so much of that already in the data that these large systems are being trained on. And as a result, because they're not strong at the kind of more logical types of reasoning, you get things like hallucinations where the system makes up answers to questions. You get a blurring of truth and falsehood. These systems have no real sense for what is true, what is false. There's unreliable math and logic. There's unreliable planning skills. And so to summarize, you can think of today's generative AI as doing soft pattern matching and generation, which goes a surprisingly long way. It does a lot of things that look like logic, but it's actually not doing that kind of hard reasoning. And I'll add a caveat, which is that this stuff may change. I mean, at the rate at which AI technology is advancing, everything I'm saying on this slide might be obsolete by next week, next month, next year. It's unclear exactly what it's going to take to get over these kinds of challenges. Now, I want to give you an example, very basic. So arithmetic arguably is a certain kind of logic. And again, as many of you may have read or seen or tested yourself, this is ChatGPT-4 getting very basic arithmetic wrong. What's surprising is that it actually does very well with 2 or 3 digit multiplication. Once you get to 4 digits, it's very consistently wrong. And what's interesting is not just that it's wrong once, but if you challenge it in various different ways, it will keep providing wrong answers over and over again. I've had extensive conversations with ChatGPT where I can basically feed it the right answer at one point, but then convince it that it was wrong, and then it will keep spitting out different answers. So this idea that there's such a thing as truth is not in there, partly because it's not doing hard logical reasoning. So what does that mean for those of us who might be using generative AI? At least with the current technology, one thing that I find useful as a way of thinking about it is that if you prefix any prompt with the sentence, give me what seems like a good response to the following prompt, then your expectations will be appropriate. And what's interesting is that for many tasks, response that seems like a good response is good enough, right? So for example, if you're brainstorming ideas for something, or if you just need to draft some text that somebody else who is an expert in the content matter will look over, then what seems like a good response may be very close to what you need. At the same time, there are also tasks for which what only seems like a good response is not good enough. And so obviously, if you're providing any kind of life and death advice, you want to be extra careful. And I would argue that different kinds of agricultural advice, for example, can be life and death for a smallholder family that is dependent on agriculture for their livelihood. So finally, let me transition to some recommendations. These are generic recommendations that I believe hold for most technology for development projects and specifically addressing certain areas of agriculture. So the first thing is all of us who hopefully have good intentions in our work in development To the extent that we find the technology useful, I believe we should be using it. It will help amplify our own impact. And again, as long as that's aligned with positive goals, that is a good thing. And incidentally, this image was generated by DALL-E 3. On the other hand, and consistent with the law of amplification, it's important whenever we can to invest in human and institutional development. I came into technology myself because I felt like technology somehow lasts, science is enduring, is looking for truths that are persistent. But over time, I've come to the conclusion that actually human beings and their capacity and their culture are what are ultimately sticky. And that if you can help raise the degree of capacity that an individual has, that an institution has, that a country has, that will stick over time in a way that, interestingly enough, technology tends not to. And so any investment in human and institutional development, I think, is worthwhile. Many of us work with technology, but if we can spend any of those donor dollars on investing in human and institutional capacity, I believe those are worthwhile. The other thing about them is that the private sector is much less willing to invest in human capacity. And so to the extent that those of us who are dependent on public sector funds to do our work, I believe those funds are best spent on the things that the private sector resists funding. And then finally, one thing that I've learned over the last couple of decades is that for those of us who are bringing technology to any given challenge in development, the most effective way to ensure that the technology is going to have positive impact, and there's very rarely a guarantee that it will, is to work with dedicated organizations who have demonstrated some success at the larger development goal that you're interested in. So in the photograph, you see an example, which is Digital Green. This is an organization that uses a lot of digital technology. Increasingly, they're also trying to incorporate AI. But one thing about the way that they operate is that they always partner with organizations, whether they're nonprofits or government agencies, that already have boots on the ground, that have trusted relationships with farmers. And as a result, their technology ends up amplifying what their partner organizations do. And that's the best guarantee that the technology is doing something positive. So I'm going to end now to take questions. But as a summary, for the most part, technology only amplifies underlying human forces. And I don't believe that AI will be any exception, although the amplifying factor may be significantly greater. Today's generative AI excels at soft statistical pattern matching and generation. And through that, it happens to do what looks like reasoning to us. But we need to be careful when we're using it. Its hard reasoning ability is still quite unreliable. And then finally, technologists should collaborate with organizations focused on development goals to ensure that the technology has positive impact. And a lot of these things I wrote up in a book, Geek Heresy. At the time that the book was released, a lot of the excitement around AI was still in the future, but I believe a lot of the lessons still hold for AI as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks so much for the insightful, very impressive feed of the information shared with us, Kentaro. So I'm going to go through some of the questions we received. And yeah, there are a lot of, as you can imagine, interest or learning more about AI, the history of AI and how far we have come. The first question I saw, which is interesting, is AI still a black box, or are we do we know better now at this stage that where AI goes wrong and when AI goes wrong, and can we trace back and kind of debug AI system? Or because there are a lot of concerns that in the early age of the neural network and AI, it seemed to be largely black box. It didn't get a lot of trust in academia. So do you see that happening again, or are there any changes coming up?
Yeah, so if I understand the question, I think it's this question of whether current AI, whether anybody really understands what it's doing. And the answer is no. I mean, to a shocking degree, even the people who are involved with building the latest state-of-the-art AI systems, they can't tell you exactly what it's doing. one way to think about that is just the sheer number of parameters that an AI system learns when it's trained on data. Like ChatGPT 3, I think, was an example where they have 175 billion numbers that when it's training itself, it learns. And those, a good number of those values have an impact on a given response that it might make to a question that you send it. It's not clear that anybody, frankly, can really understand what those numbers are doing. But even more, we really don't have a good way to fully understand exactly what the systems are doing in a way that human beings can explain. I've made one attempt, in part 2 of this talk, and I think, at least for me, it's one. It helps explain the difference between the things that it gets right and what it doesn't. But there's a big gray area in the middle where these systems appear to be doing some kind of reasoning and do it quite well, shockingly well, but then it breaks in ways that are not easy to predict. And so, yes, I think we have to be very careful. I do think, again, that there are some tasks for which existing AI is spectacular, but if it's something that's going to affect, a significant decision for an individual somewhere out there, I think we have to be very careful and really test thoroughly.
Yeah, so that's both exciting and fascinating, and also concerning and quite alarming. So hopefully we'll have some standardized kind of measure to test how truthful the AI responses are, especially for agriculture and our stakeholders in local institutions and local environment. So relatedly, so I see a question coming up around the localization of this AI technology in rural settings, for example. The rural smallholder farmers are not speaking largely the major languages that we are speaking. So they might have their own very specific context, the challenges that might not have been captured in all this training data out there that a lot of AI companies and AI developers are using. So the question is around how close are we to make these AI technologies? And one of the specific technology mentioned is kind of natural language processing to understand the local languages, rural communities, and detect those technologies, detect kind of challenges that farmers facing, and give very customized advisory services. So do you see some good examples of doing that in the
Yeah. So let me separate that question into 2 questions. I think one is about the degree to which language localization can happen for languages that are not well represented, in digital form. And then the second question is really about the degree to which agricultural advice can be tailored to a specific situation. The language localization question is very interesting. It's been known for some time that the neural net-based systems depend a lot on the availability of data. And there's a school of thought that basically believes that the more data you have, the more systems can do. And that's certainly been proven to a certain point. I think what we'll see probably within years is technology where you basically set up a system, and have it listen to conversation by somebody who is, speaking a language that the system is not yet aware of. There might need to be certain amounts of interaction. There might need to be a conversation between somebody who speaks another language. But over time, and probably that time will shrink and shrink and shrink, the system will effectively learn that language. Already existing AI is unbelievably good at translating between at least the dominant languages. And so the underlying capacity, I think, is there. And I think with additional advances in the algorithmic side, that will happen quite quickly. With respect to agricultural information, a lot depends on really the input training data. And again, I think the main question there is, my guess is existing systems, can already do surprisingly well on agricultural questions. But again, they're probably unreliable when it comes to specific things about facts, right? Like they might be, for example, let's say you're facing a particular kind of blight, and there might be a specific formula that you need to use to apply to your plants. And it might be very specific with respect to the ratio of, certain kinds of chemicals that are used and so on. there's always a danger that the system will provide an answer that looks very reasonable, but actually gets, let's say, the percentages of different input wrong, for example. And that could be disastrous for a farmer who takes advantage of that kind of content. And so there is a need, I think, to, again, test thoroughly. It's not impossible. And actually, even without current generation AI, I think a lot of that advice could certainly have been given out in an accurate way that agriculture experts would approve. So I think it's a matter of time, and maybe some of the people in the audience will be involved in developing those systems that are in fact reliable. And then a combination of those kinds of systems that can provide the kind of factual, concrete, hard advice with the systems that are good at language would basically serve that purpose.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so another question. Yeah, again, like we see a lot of questions on generative AI. I think that's really the hot topic, as you rightly said so in the beginning. So what is the unintended consequence of the centralized generative AI-based solution development right now in the market? It seems, yeah, I actually heard recently one of my colleagues kind of comparing current kind of stage of generative AI development as early days of HTML and website, and everyone is trying to develop their own homepage and things like that. But it's not quite like that. There are just only a few handful number of companies seem to have enough infrastructure, enough computational power to just dominate the market right now. So is it really alarming? Is decentralized kind of AI development really alarming? And what do you think we can kind of safeguarding unintended consequences from such a kind of almost monopoly of this Gen AI market?
Right. I do think that just like with everything else digital, that the costs of operating even what we think are prohibitively large, AI systems will come down rapidly. The market is there, and the private sector has plenty of incentive to do that. So, even if it's not practical today, again, in a decade, I think we'll be having a very different conversation about that. However, none of that will change the fact that the state-of-the-art technology will pretty much always be both in the hands of a relatively small number of large tech companies, and they will not necessarily be focused on, serving lower income smallholder farmers. And so I do think that there will be efforts that are required both to ensure that the systems that we're using are appropriately adapted. But I think an even bigger question is that we don't want to get so enamored of the technology that we're not doing the basics with respect to agriculture. I mean, agriculture, especially smallholder agriculture, is still an incredibly intensive physical activity, and without the right physical inputs and without human beings who are individually convinced of the value of doing different things, it won't matter if you have the best AI. And so I think we're always interested in the balance of how much we're investing in people versus how much we're getting excited about technology.
Yeah, great. So one of the questions related to policy and a little bit of safeguarding the risk of AI. So last week, US President Biden issued an executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy AI. And I guess there are many other countries also rushing to set up some kind of legal framework to protect their citizens from possible economy-wide risk potentially caused by AI. And yeah, I'm sure you might have seen that from the news. So have you found something like stood out that you really found it resonating with you, or something still quite missing? We are not quite, pinpointing or focusing on really important issue.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the conversations are there. I thought it was encouraging that the Biden administration put out an executive order about AI regulation. I think a lot of what was in that is going in the right direction. I do think that globally governments are aware of the challenge and they are trying to do the right thing. I think one area where all of us who care about international development should be supporting these efforts is to try to get countries to do this together. AI to me is like nuclear power, for us in the potential power and disruption it might cause. And just like nuclear power, if we don't have international agreements about things, this is far more than nuclear technology. AI will cross borders. And so if there's not a strong international set of agreements, then bad actors will just move to wherever the regulation is weakest and cause just as much damage. And so I think it's really important that there's international cooperation. Very difficult to imagine given the current state of the world, but I think, again, those of us involved in kind of global affairs really need to push for that.
Okay, great. So stepping a little bit away from the risk and scary stories, we also have a lot of youth participants joining today. Do you have some kind of wisdom to share those kind of the next generation leaders in entrepreneurship and especially in agriculture sector? What do you kind of recommend them to kind of take a look, and maybe starting from somewhere that they don't miss this important wave of changes coming up in AI, in ICT?
Yeah, I mean, for relatively speaking, younger audience, I would say, I think what's interesting is that, especially people who might consider themselves digital natives, because they can really only remember a world in which there was computers and where they had smartphones when they were in junior high school or high school. In some ways, my generation, I'm now in my mid-50s, but we grew up with the technology and we were so intrigued by the potential of this new technology that we kept ignoring the potential downside. And I think what people who have grown up with the technology can see is that the problems of the world have not gone away just because everybody now has a smartphone, everyone has access to the internet. And so it's clearly not the case that the technology necessarily makes things better. And I think keeping that in mind is super helpful. That's not to say that technology can't help in various ways, but that imagining that the technology by itself will be a solution, I think is far off. I do think that there is AI represents an incredible opportunity. I mean, in my own work, so much of the time, I just wish I could speak with some of the farmers that I interacted with just directly. And we're now at a point where that technology is basically there, or if not around the corner. And it would be amazing if linguistic barriers came down because of technology. It would really change the world in some dramatic ways. So look for those, but also be aware of the pitfalls.
Okay, great. So just one last question. This is about the data, or again, going back to the training of AI, high quality data. We hear sometimes, there's just so much data, we are ready for AI, but at the same time, do we really have enough data? Because there are still rural farmers and rural areas not quite covered very well from all these kind of connectivities and ICT technology extent. So do you have any suggestion on how do we go about, kind of feeding AI or collecting enough quality data for agriculture, and where do we start and how do we get there?
Yeah, that's difficult to answer without the context of a specific problem. In some cases, the data that we already have is enough. In other cases, even despite the deluge of data that we have, it's not the right kind of data. One of the things that I've seen with, it's now been a little over a decade since the phrase big data became a big deal, and people are constantly thinking about, oh yes, there's so much data out there, we must be able to learn something new. And of course, there are some fields that have benefited from it, but if you think about it, it's surprisingly little how much we've actually learned that is fundamentally new because of some analysis of the existing data. And a lot of the time, it's because the data that exists is not of a kind that helps us understand new things. There are still experiments that need to be run, new data to be collected. So it really depends on the task. And I think for some tasks, we have plenty of data, but we have is more than enough. For other tasks, we need to go out and collect more. One example being, for example, the question you asked earlier about, languages which are spoken by a relatively small number of people. There are just no digital repositories of those languages or corpora that match those languages with languages that we are very familiar with. And so at least for now, we don't have easy ways to have an AI system learn those languages.
So yeah, there might actually be an opportunity for our young listeners, the young audience to jump into. So yeah, there must be a good opportunity to make a big impact. Okay, so thanks so much, Kentaro, for everything you presented today. So it's a very, again, insightful topic, get a lot of interest. And I'm sure we will continue throughout the week, this conversation around AI. So yeah, hope to see you someday again. Okay, so let's move this day. Yeah, of course, thanks. Let's move this day forward and welcome this year's host. And coming to us from Lagos, Nigeria, I'm pleased to introduce one of the most passionate next generation leaders who has been involved in many past ICTforAg events. And here you go, Femi Adekoya. Femi, stage is yours.
All right. Thank you so much, Jahu and Kentaro, for such an amazing opening section. And that's actually one introduction. Thank you so much, Jahu. So ICTforAg community, are you excited? As I am excited. Thank you so much for being here today and also in the course of the week. My name is Femi Adekoya, and I'll be your host for this week. And I will be helped with Jahu and the team of MCs and moderators during the course of this virtual event over the next 72 hours. I am super excited and I want you to actually build your energy. We've heard from Kentaro, what an amazing keynote address there. So once again, my name is Femi Adekoya, and people do call me the Flying Farmer. Of course, I do not have wings, but I am the founder of Integrated Area Precision, an agri-tech startup based here in Nigeria, Lagos, where we are providing precision agriculture solutions to farmers, leveraging drone technology and the power of data analytics to help farmers to farm smarter, better, and more profitably. And I'm also passionate about raising the next generation of tech-inclined and digitally savvy farmers who are able to influence and actually play actively in the fourth agricultural revolution, which is the digital revolution. So once again, thank you so much for joining us. And I want to say thank you to USAID as part of the Feed the Future program. And also DAI, want to say thank you to CGIAR and also GlobeDev for actually organizing and making ICTforAg 2023 a reality. Awesome. So while we're excited about this year, all that we have for you, I am even more excited to. I'm more excited for what is coming in the course of this event, and as we also proceed into 2024, because 2024 promises to actually be better and greater. So we want to actually keep the community better connected and engaged all year round in our learning network. So I just want to give you a brief history about ICTforAg. This event has evolved over time since 2015, yes, when it started in Washington, DC area. And it has actually become an annual convening event where agri-food system stakeholders, technology experts, and enthusiasts gather to share knowledge, find solutions, and form partnerships to address challenges in the agri-food system across the low and middle income countries. This year, we are actually having this virtually, but next year, we're going to be having, and many more years to come, which we hope, we're going to be having them in person. So we're going to be coming back in person and also having an hybrid format. A virtual event this year that transforms into an hybrid event next year would allow us to establish in-person connection while using technology that, like we are here today, okay? This technology and virtual component of our event makes this content and community inclusive and available to all around the world. So before we jump into the 3 days agenda, I want to actually encourage you all to be active, and we want you to actually participate actively on social media and engage your network. We want you to actually use the hashtag ICTforAg 2023, hashtag ICTforAg 2023, so that it can be easy to follow your posts, your tags, and also tagging appropriate organizations like Feed the Future, organizations like USAID, organizations like CGIAR, and DAI Global. So you can actually find them on social media, on Twitter, on LinkedIn. And most importantly, do not forget to tag and mention at ICTforAg so that your tweets can actually be retweeted, your engagement can actually have more wider audience. So we encourage you to actually head over to the photo booth right now, and you would actually see a link in the chat section. Okay, so you select the prop that you would like and take a memory shot of your attendance here at ICTforAg. We want to tell you, and I want to personally tell you, that you should have fun. Ensure to have fun and share your photo across all social media. Let people know, make it public, share the excitement with everyone, your network, your peers, your colleague, and all in general. So we have an incredible agenda with more than 100 speakers across more than 50 sections covering topics that spans inclusion, innovation, and inspiration. So Jao, I heard that there is actually a certification and a certificate available to attendees. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yes, so we received many questions about the certificate, and we got you covered. So we will issue the certificate based on your active participation and engagement throughout the week. You asking the question, attend the session, and visiting the booth, etc. So look out for the post-conference email next week, and we will follow up and we'll provide information how we can issue the certificate. But yeah, first, we would love to see you actively engaging, and then we can sort out the certificate business next week. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jao. So we'd like you to actively engage. That is actually the key word, actively engage. And don't forget to have fun. So let's get into some housekeeping. Okay, so the lobby is where you go to find everything and choose the next section you would like to attend. Please use the chat functionality in the sections you attend in the lobby to submit your questions. Share your thoughts and reflect on what we hear while you are here. As an attendee, you are able to build your agenda and sections throughout our 3 days together. Over the course of this event, you can be able to build your agendas and sections by bookmarking sections, and you will be attending in your calendar within the itinerary. We have so many great sections and time where breakouts are going on at the same time. If you can't actually watch live, all of these sections will be available shortly after each sections, ongoing after the event, both just right in this Zoom event, and also in long term on the ICT website and perhaps on social media. So here are some first tests of navigating Zoom events. It is time to transition to our next keynote section. So you would actually have to exit the Zoom webinar, return to the lobby. If you are actually already in the lobby, the individual keynote sections will continue to play in the lobby area. If you want to click into the sections, you are able to select the section and join the Zoom webinar. Inside the webinar, you are able to participate in a section, post to the chat, and be part of an audience interaction. Jao, we will see you over in the Bean Talk keynote. See you there.